one of the really interesting things about the exegesis is, as Pamela's suggesting, it's not a consecutive sequence of the development of his thoughts. It's a series of impulsive forays into the material. And he responds to things, and he goes on a run, he proposes a theory to himself, and he runs it to its end, or he runs it anyway to the point where he's exhausted himself or its possibilities, and he will often then tend to collapse into stillness and sometimes renounce the entire project at that point. And then when it picks up again, it's as though he's beginning for the first time. He returns to the source of the vision and says, okay, now I'm going to do this right, and I'm going to begin again. And one of the interesting things that does is it creates a series of models for intellectual journeying. And in fact, it also imposed the same structure of the foray and then the retreat on our editorial efforts. You know, it sort of encodes the exhilaration of discovery and the collapse into despair that we went through again and again as we contended with the material. And I really do think it represented a kind of emotional bravery on Pamela's part to live with the thing as long as she did. But we sometimes did have to kind of reel her back from the precipice. And but I also think that it was incredibly moving in a way that this project required so many hands. And you know, the very first proposal that the exegesis ever be dealt when it was living in Paul Williams' garage in Sonoma and was, you know, truly had no prospects whatsoever except in the idealism of a handful of fans, was crowdsourcing before crowdsourcing. It was a few pages had been handed out to a number of people, and they were transcribing it, you know, into very early computing programs, which of course are inaccessible now. So those early transcriptions all became a kind of another lost horizon that we just knew existed but couldn't look over. But it returned to its crowdsourced origins in a funny way at the end. With all the various people that we called into it, and I think I'll be able to turn over to Erik in a moment if I just set this up a bit further. We also, of course, quite naturally, at some point we thought, well, gosh, this thing is so problematic and it's so suggestive but so strange. What we need is like an ambassador from outside the Philip K. Dick universe to mediate for people. So we were, you know, and this I'm literally reporting on my own thinking aloud. I kept saying to them, what we've got to do is get, you know, Oliver Sacks to introduce it, or we've got to get Lawrence Wexler to introduce it. You know, one of these like brilliant generalists who does a great job of speaking in a popular idiom about very scholarly or very esoteric matters. And I was thinking, who can be that person? But of course, asking someone to actually take responsibility to introduce and mediate the entire exegesis to a popular audience is basically asking someone to go temporarily mad. Because you can't do it quickly. Pamela was living with this thing for years, and she couldn't encompass it or paraphrase it readily. And so we retreated from this idea, and I started to realize, and this is where the blind man's elephant comes into play. I began to see, wait a minute, we don't need one liaison. What we need are a number of different people just responding to it. Because what that will do is model for the reader our experience as editors and their likely experience as readers, which is that you can't get your brain around the entirety, but you can make forays in and encounter parts that stimulate you and think about those provocations with enormous excitement. And so we got, you know, Steve Erickson, a novelist who'd also written about Philip K. Dick at one point. We got Catherine Hales, an academic who theorizes science fiction and technology. We got Jeffrey Kripal. Am I saying his last name right? Kripal, who's a academic with a inclination towards mysticism and theology. We got a genuine in Gabriel McKee. We got a genuine Christian theological thinker who was also a very big Philip K. Dick fan. We got David Gill, who was kind of a representative from the active fan culture, you know, a real liaison to the Philip K. Dick readers out there, someone who'd been keeping the equivalent of a fanzine alive online. And then Pamela and I wrote annotations ourselves. But we also realized this job was too much for us, and so we needed Erik Davis, who was not only an annotator, but became the orchestrator of the annotations. And he herded all these different smart cats into the room and said, I'm going to be your manager, and what you have to do is not understand the entirety. Just read some of it, see what you think, and bounce some thoughts back to it. And we'll put those in as annotations. So instead of having one master introduction, which was never possible or likely, we have all these different people taking a look at the thing. So they're the blind men and it's the elephant. And Erik was the maestro of this process. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, first I just want to say this is really trippy for me because I was turned on to Philip K. Dick in 1985 when I lived in Berkeley for one summer at the notorious Barrington Hall. And it was a very weird summer. And I bought some of my first Dick books from that shelf over there and, went on and by the late 80s, I wrote my thesis on Dick because I was totally obsessed with Phil Dick and Gnosticism and post-structuralist philosophy. And so I was already setting myself up to be able to kind of be able to hang with this in a way for extended periods of time, because from a philosophical perspective, in a religious thought perspective, it's incredibly fascinating. I'm studying religious studies now, and the more I spend time with this material, the more I look at Dick in those lens rather than a literary lens, because it's sort of almost more fresh for me. And also you have this extraordinary, unparalleled document. This person who's undergoing, absolutely profoundly bizarre and marvelous and strange and frightening and exhilarating experiences, and keeping this vast, recursive, iterative, highly intelligent, and then highly speculative manuscript in relationship to it. And he's also incredibly brilliant and with this completely bizarre imagination that we love. So it's just, it was a total gas to be able to work on this material. But that, as Jonathan said, it was very, very clear that, to me, one of the things that marks Dick from a mystical perspective as a religious thinker, which he is in the Exegesis and even in his novels to varying degrees, is this profound sense of the inconclusiveness of any speculative endeavor, and that it's much more about the process, perhaps because you're obsessed and have no choice in it, perhaps because it is the muse for you, but that the world that is revealed is constantly undermining itself, and it's this kind of radical contingency, even as it moves forward with tremendous spiritual depths and sometimes extraordinarily moving passages of supreme affect, a kind of like Jacob Boehme or Kafka, or it's full on at points. So it's just totally aghast. But obviously, in order to represent that, we wanted as many kind of voices as possible. So it wasn't just that we got this great crew of folks to work on the annotations, but they came from very different perspectives, and so they read it in very different ways. I was very happy to have Anne Catherine Hales, for example, because she's written about post-humanism. She's very interested in technology and literature, and she's very science-minded and skeptical. So she looked at this, what happened to Dick, as a brain event, and narrated it in terms of being a brain event, which is, of course, something that he himself did to varying degrees. That was one of the perspectives, or actually a number of perspectives. It's vitamins. It has to do with the corpus callosum. It has to do with, particular frequencies. It's not a entirely mystical process. Most of the time he had different approaches to it, but that was very important in getting religious angles, getting philosophers, getting people who could hang with that speculative imagination, and then really just being able to move through the document and handle it. I think the most fun I had was going to visit the actual exegesis and pull out the folders when we needed to scan the many remarkable diagrams and doodles that are in the book, which is one of the best things about it. They were really remarkable little thought glyphs, very topographical, very alchemical in a certain way, very much like circuit diagrams. He was a very cybernetic thinker in a lot of ways, and you can see that in the way that he would diagram these various speculative schemes, which he would then kind of run through in an almost, sort of a kind of calculating, visionary way through the material, through page after page after page. So actually being able to hold these things up and go through the material and see the intimacy of the ballpoint was just a total total gas for me and for all of us, and again, it was gas that we needed in order to get the project done. And I'm very impressed that it's done and that it came out as good as it does, and you can't see the sausage maker too much because it's some sausage.
So